Hi, this is CCM6, plotting rational numbers and absolute value. What is an integer? An integer is any positive or negative whole number. A rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction, positive or negative. So as you see, we have whole numbers, positive or negative, and then anything that can be written as a fraction, positive or negative. First, we're going to plot just some basic integers on the number line, just so you get comfortable. So it says plot the following integers on the number line. Notice we have positive and negative whole numbers. So I've got my number line in 0, but I need to go through and label the numbers down here. Not these numbers, but the counting numbers and the whole numbers that I'll be plotting. So I've got 0, so if I go right, that's positive. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If I go left, that's negative. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, and negative 5, and negative 6. So I've gone through and I've created my number line. Now I just need to plot the numbers that I have listed. So I'm going to plot a dot on positive 2, a dot on negative 6. Why don't you go through and see how I've done it already? Why don't you go through and try the rest of them yourself? Okay, did you get what I got? Hope so. All right, now we're going to plot 3 sets of numbers on a number line, but as you can tell, these are all rational numbers. They're positive or negative fractions. So I've got a number line here, but the center is 0, but it only stretches out 1 in the positive direction and 1 in the negative direction. So my number line stretches between negative 1 to all the way up to positive 1. I've got fractions, some negatives, some positives. I really just need to figure out where to put these on my number line. So if you look, I've got some dashes placed on my number line, and that just symbolizes, this would symbolize 1/3 of the way from 0 to 1. This is another third of the way, so I've got 2/3 of the way all the way down to 1. So I know that each one of these pieces is worth 1/3 because I've cut my number from 0 to 1 in 3 pieces. So if I went in the opposite direction, this would be worth negative 1/3 because I'm going in the negative direction, and this would be worth negative 2/3. If you look, my denominators are not all thirds, but I can kind of guess where they're going to be located on my number line. I know that this line has got to be a half because it's halfway between 0 and 1. If I draw in a new line, this has got to be negative 1/2, halfway between 0 and negative 1. Now you kind of have a grasp on where all these numbers are located. So let's plot. I'm going to plot, I'll just go from the first one to the end. Negative 1/4, okay. Negative 1/4 is the same as negative 0.25. I know that because I've memorized very common fraction decimal conversions. Negative 0.25, so that is not yet close enough to 1/3. That's not exactly 1/3, but it's not more than 1/3. I'm going to put this fraction, negative 1/4, in between 0 and negative 1/3. So if you think about it, it's halfway between 0 and negative 1/2. It's 1/4 of the way from 0 to 1, negative 1. So think of all those relationships as you go through and plot your points. 4/5. 4/5 is almost 1, so I'll just draw a line about right there, and it's almost positive 1 whole. 1/4 would be approximately here. It's 1/4 of the way from 0 to 1, halfway between 0 and 1/2. Negative 2/3, well, I already have that there. I'm going to erase this. I don't want you to get confused that that's plotting. So I've got a point here, a point here, a point here, and a point here so far. The last one is positive half. So I've got all 5 of my points drawn on my number line. This is a little bit trickier than what you're used to, so you need to take it slow and think things through. On my next number line, again, I've got between -1 and +1. Why don't you try this one on your own, push pause, and then when you're ready, push play, and I'll do this one on the board. Okay, let's start with what I know. If I look here, I've got 2 tick marks between 0 and 1, so that means I've cut this unit in 3 pieces. So this has to be 1/3, which I have as a point. And then this has to be 2/3, which I also have as a point that I'm supposed to plot. -1/10. -1/10 is very, very small, but it's on the negative side of my number line. It's very, very small. It's almost nothing. So I'm going to think, I think this one is -1/10, -1/10. Okay? -3/5 and -5/6. This is very close to -1. This is very close to -1/2. Because half of 5 is 2.5 and 3 is almost 2.5. So 3/5 is kind of close to a half. So I'm going to assume that -3/5 is maybe this one. So that one's taken care of. And this -5/6 is going to be about here. And I've taken care of that. So here are all my numbers shown on my number line in order. The next one we see is between -2 and +2. Again, pause your video, see if you can do this on your own, and then when you're ready, push play, and I'll do it for you on the board. All right, looks like we've got some negatives, some positives, and then I've got some improper fractions over here. So if I'm going to simplify this, this would be -1 and 9/10. -4/3 would be -1 and 1/3. +7/4 would be 1 and 3/4. So, oh, I've got 3 halves. That's 1 1/2. All right, so let's knock this out. -1/4 is very close to 0, but on the negative side. It's 1/4 of the way between 0 and -1. So I'm going to put -1/4 right there. 1 and 1/2, that's in the positive region. So 1 1/2, I would say, is about there. Let's write it the way it was written, 3 halves. 9/10. 9/10 is almost 1 whole in the positive region. So I'm going to assume it's right here. That's 9/10. -19/10, which simplifies to -1 and 9/10. That's almost all the way to -2. So I'm going to assume it's about right here. Again, I'm going to write it in its original form. -19/10. So that's done. -4/3, that simplifies to -1 and 1/3. So it's, if I'm starting at 0, it's all the way to -1 and a third further to the left. So that's going to be right here. I'm going to use its original, the way it's originally written, -4/3. And the last one, 7/4, which is 1 and 3/4 if I write it as a mixed number. So it's +1 and 3/4 more. So I'm going to put it right here, 7/4 in the positive region. So there we go. I forgot my little dots. So -4/3, -19/10. All right, looks good. Let's try some absolute value. Absolute value is the distance a number is from 0 on the number line. Absolute value uses the symbol of 2 vertical lines. It helps express distance, not direction. So again, it's just how far away the number is from 0 on the number line. So if I were to simplify these expressions, I would just think about how far away that number is from 0. So this is how I read this. I would say, what's the absolute value of 18? Well, 18 is 18 spaces away from 0 on the number line, so the absolute value of 18 is 18. Number 2, the absolute value of negative 3. Negative 3 is 3 spaces from 0 on the number line, so the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. The absolute value of 0. 0 is 0 places from the number line, so the absolute value of 0 is 0. And here's the last one. You could read this as the opposite of the absolute value of negative 13. So I'm first going to focus on the absolute value portion of this question. What's the absolute value of negative 13? Well, it's positive 13. But what's the opposite of positive 13? Negative 13. So this is a scenario where if you're simplifying an absolute value expression, you actually might come out with a negative answer because there's more than one thing going on here. It's not just absolute value, it's the opposite of the absolute value. So this is where students kind of get mixed up. The last one down here is we're just going to take these 4 values and list them in order from least to greatest. So first I'm going to go through and figure out what they're worth. 3 is just 3, nothing to it. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Negative 5 is negative 5, done. Now this one, again, the opposite of the absolute value of negative 3. Well, the absolute value of negative 3 is 3, but the opposite of 3 is negative 3. Now let's list these from least to greatest. Let's list them in their original form. The smallest number would be this one, negative 5. Then the opposite absolute value of negative 3. That was number 2 because it's worth negative 3. And then the other 2 are both positive numbers. The next one would be 3, and the last one would be the absolute value of negative 5, which is worth 5. Okay, so here's my final answer. Hopefully you followed along. That was just a quick tidbit of information about absolute value and plotting numbers on a number line.